This is Heal Your Mind, Heal Your Body with Dr. Schuyler. Discover how your thoughts manifest disease and what you can do about it. Here's your host, Dr. Schuyler.
Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back. I'm really excited to get into this new series of mysterious illnesses and this interesting fact you may not be aware of, that our emotions actually get buried alive, especially anger, fear, and trauma. So I'll be doing a series on mysterious illnesses, and it's going to round out with two patients who have had mysterious illnesses. One had mast cell activation syndrome, and that's when the white blood cells create this allergic reaction and this excessive amount of histamine. And she basically, literally would have anaphylactic reaction whenever she ate most foods, and then lots of GI issues. And the other patient that's going to round out this series has something called small fiber neuropathy. It's when she felt pins and needles and burning sensations in her hands and feet, as well as IBS. So before we get to the guests in a couple of weeks, I want to illustrate how emotions play a role in these mysterious illnesses. And when I have them as guests, they're really going to highlight how much their emotions played a role in these very mysterious rare diseases. So emotions are stored in the connective tissues called the fascia. And when they're not released or get expressed, they get buried alive. And this causes inflammation, and it can cause mysterious illnesses. We talked about in the first couple episodes that emotions are just the glue that binds the mind to the body. They're a psychological phenomenon that are also experienced physically. When we experience these strong emotions, our bodies respond, and these responses become stored or they become trapped in the tissues. So when anger and other emotions are suppressed, or they're repressed, if it's not in a safe environment to express yourself, or you're chronically people-pleasing, or you're living with someone that gaslights, the body remains in this heightened state of alertness. So this chronic stress response has this overproduction of hormones like cortisol. And cortisol exacerbates muscle tension and the fascia tightness. So over time, this tension causes pain and stiffness, and it can even contribute to chronic long-term conditions. Research suggests that we can hold on to our emotional experiences, especially traumatic ones, in the connective tissue. So this manifests as physical symptoms, such as pain or restricted movement, and there's really no obvious physical injury. A really good example of this is chronic widespread pain. So this is often linked to emotional stress or trauma, and it's not been adequately processed. It gets stuffed, it gets neglected. And the pain just simply becomes a way for the body to signal, hey, pay attention here. There's some unresolved emotional tension. Can we please address it? So what exactly is fascia? If you can think of it as the body's own web. It's this web-like connective tissue that surrounds the muscles, the organs, the nerves, the blood vessels. Fascia is so highly innervated, it means that it has many nerve endings, so it makes it sensitive to emotional stimuli. And if these emotions aren't processed, this tension becomes chronic, and it leads to tightness and rigidity around this web, this fascia that surrounds your muscles and your organs. So fascia is an active participant in the body's response to stress and emotions. So fascia has been found to have memory of sorts, like it's retaining these patterns of tension that are associated with emotional experiences. And this leads to the body holding chronically over long term these experiences. So certain areas of the body remain tense, certain areas of the fascia bands, they remain tense, and they become painful due to unresolved emotional issues. So think of it this way, like emotional memory in the fascia refers to this phenomenon where emotional experiences, especially those that are intense or traumatic or involve a lot of anger, they become imprinted in the fascia tissue. This imprinting is thought to occur because the way the fascia responds to stress and trauma. So when the body experiences a stressful event or a traumatic event or even just emotional pain, it can create tension patterns in the fascia as a protective mechanism. It's as if these emotional experiences, they're not fully processed, and these tension patterns become chronic. It becomes a way of life. the body and the fascia is essentially storing the emotion in the body. So, how exactly does this fascia hold memory? And there's a neurobiological link to it. So, fascia is rich in sensory nerves, nerves that respond to pressures and movement, and they detect pain. These nerves send signals to the brain. So, when an emotion is experienced, the brain may send signals to the fascia, causing it to contract or change its tension. So, over time, if these emotions, these anger, this rage, this fear, sadness, guilt, shame, if it's not released, the fascia holds on to it and creates an altered state, leading to physical manifestation as tightness and pain and even restricted movement and mobility. So, chronic stress, we know this, unresolved emotions like anger and fear. It causes this continuous activation of the fight or flight response. We've talked about this at length in previous episodes, and that keeps the body in this heightened state of tension. So now think of it in terms of this innervating web that goes around your entire body, that this fascia, it responds and becomes stiff and it develops adhesions. And where the tissue becomes stuck together, it limits your movement, it limits your flexibility, it can even limit your strength. So, this physical state can perpetuate the emotional state. And this is where you have like this cycle, this bidirectional cycle of the mind and body reinforcing each other. So, let's look at it in terms of trauma. Trauma can be emotional, it can be psychological, financial. There's many ways, and people often think, well, trauma has to be some major event, like some major assault. No, trauma can be a very serious emotional assault on your psyche, on your spiritual being. It doesn't have to be some major event where trauma can start having imprints on you. It could happen from childhood, anywhere in your lifespan that could happen. So, trauma, whether it's physical or it's emotional, has this really big, profound impact on the fascia. So, during traumatic experiences, the body goes into this fight or flight, or often freezing, or it tenses up. So think over chronic long period of time. We've talked about before this freeze response, this protective response becomes ingrained in the fascia, leading to long-term changes in the tissue structures and functions. And I really want to bring up the example I've brought her up before, Celine Dion. Again, think about the body goes into survival mode. It freezes and it tenses up. That's what we're neurobiologically wired to do during serious trauma if you can't fight or flight. And this protective response gets ingrained. And she has got stiff person syndrome. She has long-term grief. And these long-term changes in the tissue impacts its structure and functions. So these changes can persist long after the traumatic event. So people are like, well, I don't understand. My childhood happened when I was 5 years old. I'm 52 now. It stores. It stores in your body. These changes can persist a long time after the traumatic event. And they often will manifest as chronic widespread pain, chronic pain, physical symptoms that are difficult to treat because they're linked to emotional issues. Again, mysterious illnesses. These are physical symptoms that are so difficult for physicians to treat because it's linked to unresolved emotions. While the concept of, fascia holding emotional memory, it's still being explored scientifically, there are many bodywork therapies, myofascial release, craniosacral therapy, and what I practice, somatic experiencing. And that's when the mind and the body begin to process the emotion together. And I am a very, very big advocate. One of my team members is a somatic practitioner. And I practice somatic yoga 4, 5, 6 days a week. That is to illustrate how much of a fan I am of no matter where you have emotions in your life, that they can store in the fascia. So operating on the somatic experiencing, this myofascial release of emotions and pain and trauma, it operates on the premise of releasing tension. The fascia releases stored emotions. And I briefly talked about this, and I'll just skim it. We won't go into this episode, but epigenetic transmission of trauma is where trauma gets released and stored down into our DNA passed on from our ancestors. So fascia stores the emotions and then we're passing it down. So practitioners like myself, we often will see clients experiencing these really big emotional releases when they start moving their body, especially there's crying, there's anger, there's rage. That's why oftentimes I take my patients on walks. We start walking, we start moving the body, we start processing the trauma. And this is due to the release of stored emotions. And when we begin to experience this release, and by working with the fascia, we begin to release these stored emotions, and it's very, very powerful to witness. And you'll see people crying or usually women cry and men get very angry. And this is the body letting go of a stored tension. It's a very natural, healthy process to allow someone to go through. So this idea that the fascia can hold memory, it's just so fascinating because it gives this very unique insight into the mind-body connection, and it really suggests that our emotional experiences are not just stored in the brain and in the heart. We talked about this before, how the heart has these neurons in there, and they actually send memories up to the brain. So now what we're looking at here is not memories and experiences are not just stored in the brain, not just stored in the heart, but they're also encoded into the body's tissues. So think of all the times that you were angry and rageful or sad or just muting it, that you held it in. You weren't allowed to express it. It wasn't the appropriate time. And especially for men, showing anger is really looked down upon. So men just begin to stuff it. And the ones that do show it, let it out. And it can be a very scary event for the person on the other receiving end of it. So when you look at how this interplay of emotions, dynamics, and who you surround yourself with, it really begs the question, how do we start feeling and moving through our anger and our rage where it doesn't hurt the other person, but also doesn't get stored in our body? Because emotions, especially anger, as they store in the connective tissues, they're not fully processed or expressed. And this causes odd pains and tensions and stiffness. It leads to autoimmune and chronic widespread pain and thyroid. And I'm going to briefly just get into the thyroid, just to give an example of this mysterious illness. So the thyroid gland is located in the neck, and it plays this crucial role in regulating the metabolism, energy levels, and basically all, overall hormonal balance. Emotional stress, particularly chronic anger and frustration. If you know someone has chronic anger and frustration, this has a profound impact on thyroid. And I've seen this clinically and personally. People who have anger issues, for lack of a better word, often have an impact on their thyroid function. The thyroid is highly sensitive to stress. Prolonged emotional distress leads to an imbalance of the thyroid hormone production. So when it's repressed or unresolved, it creates this tension in the fascia surrounding the neck and throat, right where the thyroid gland is located. So this chronic tension potentially disrupts normal functioning of the thyroid gland and can lead to conditions like hypothyroidism, hyperthyroidism, and that's characterized by, underactive or overactive thyroid functions, fatigue, weight gain. I know someone has a thyroid condition and just a complete intolerance to cold, which is a very common symptom. Again, unexpressed, unresolved anger. And these symptoms can be exacerbated by unresolved emotional anger. So if we take a look at repressed anger and its psychological impact, so repressed anger occurs when an individual either consciously or most of the time subconsciously suppresses their anger, their rage. And this is because they perceive it's unacceptable or they fear the consequence of expressing it. So when anger is repressed, this limbic system, the brain's emotional center, it remains active. It doesn't get a chance to take a break. It's always logged on. This prolonged activation keeps the body in this heightened state of arousal, this chronic fight or flight. And this dysregulates the nervous system and contributes to various psychological and physiological issues. So how does all this kind of play into mysterious illnesses? Well, when you look at the stress response, anger, typically you'll see people with autoimmune conditions and thyroid conditions and mast cell activation or, small fiber neuropathy. There's a chronic stress and there's chronic emotional suppression. And those diseases often manifest chronic repressed anger. And this can lead to systemic inflammation. So when the body's immune system perceives these threats, whether they're physical, like an infection, or emotional, being around someone that's unhealthy or toxic or stressed out, when the anger gets repressed, the body remains in the state of stress, prompting release of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. And this promotes inflammation. Inflammation's associated with heart health, autoimmune diseases, cardiovascular disease, and mental health, especially depression and anxiety. So when we look at these mysterious illnesses linked to anger, when you look at mast cell activation, one of the mysterious disorders that I've treated, and it's becoming more and more prevalent, it's a disorder where the mast cell, it's a type of white blood cell, which involves allergic reactions. It gets this excessive amount of chemicals called histamine. And you can get hives, anaphylactic shock, itching, swelling, a lot of GI issues, headaches, brain fog, and it can impact the blood pressure and heart palpitations. So when we look at mast cell activation syndrome, it's considered a mysterious illness because it can mimic a variety of other conditions that often goes undiagnosed. And I will see patients and they're going through a battery of tests or going through a plethora of physicians, and they're having these hives and they're itching and they're having abdominal pain and headaches, and the GI physician can't find anything. The allergist can't find anything. The cardiologist can't find anything. I'm like, wait, hold on. Let's take a look at this mast cell activation syndrome. This may be a possibility, especially if I can see a history of repressed emotional anger and rage. So repressed anger and rage can exacerbate and even trigger conditions like MCAS. And it's through the impact on the immune system. And we know chronic stress resulting from suppressed emotions hyperactivate the immune response. And that's where mast cells become overly sensitive and more prone to releasing their inflammatory contents. So when we think about it, this repressed anger impacts the immune system. The immune system's hyperactive. These cells, these immune cells, get overly sensitive. And you start experiencing hives and itching and sweats, and there's nothing medically wrong. So individuals with high levels of repressed anger express these very mysterious chronic inflammation, chronic pain disease, which contributes to dysfunctional mast cells. So when the body's in this prolonged state of inflammation, the mast cells become even more reactive, leading to more symptoms. And it's this cyclical downward spiral. And this patient that you'll see in a week or two, you can hear her story, how every time she ate something, she had to administer an EpiPen, ended up in the ER. Like, it was life-threatening. Just eating food put her life in danger. That's how serious these mysterious illnesses can get, and her story is remarkable. She happens to also be a nurse, so it's like a double-edged sword. She knew what was happening to her, but she didn't understand why. She knew her life was in danger, but she couldn't pinpoint why her life was in danger. You really enjoy that story coming up. So when you look at the mind-body connection, it's really important that we look at how repressed emotions lead to physical illness. And emotions like anger are not just a psychological phenomenon. They have this profound, profound impact on the body's physiology. So when emotions are not expressed or processed, they manifest. They just manifest. And it includes inflammation and a dysregulated immune system. And it gets trapped into this web that, is used to protect our body. And you look at stiff person syndrome, you look at mast cell activation and small fiber neuropathy. You're looking at things like the fascia bands where anger and sadness are repressed. So anger is this, when it's repressed, is this significant emotional stressor. And it can lead to all these mysterious ailments and unknown diseases and syndromes. And understanding and addressing these emotional underpinnings of chronic illness, it's really crucial that we start looking at things. And I've said this so many times, diet is so important. I personally don't do gluten or sugar or dairy, and it's not for any other reason that those are inflammatory foods. So I really like to, do what you're supposed to do. The yoga, the walking, the water, the food, the way of life, all that's great. Implement it all. Holistic medicine, fantastic. Western medicine, it's good to an extent. But let's start also looking at unexpressed anger, unexpressed rage. If you have chronic widespread pain, if you have migraines, if you have multiple sclerosis or a thyroid condition, start looking at some of the things that you have been bearing emotionally, maybe your whole life. Here are some easy hacks that I recommend to my patients who are experiencing unexpressed or repressed anger, and they're anger out hacks. And my favorite one is a scream pillow, like screaming pillow. Like you take a pillow and you scream into it. And I tell parents to take a pillow and leave it in your car. My favorite place to scream is in my car. And I have a little place I like to go where no one's around. No one's going to call the cops. If they see this crazy woman sitting in a car screaming into a pillow, no one's going to see it or hear it. And it's just something to get out of your body. You can go into a closet if you need to. If you're feeling it in the moment, get it out in the most appropriate way you can. If you're at work and you have to go to the restroom and just kind of open your mouth and do like the silent scream and tense all your muscles and just crouch down, pretend like you're screaming, let it out. There's something that's called another word for it, but the word I'm going to use is called Dang It Doll. And you can get them on Amazon, and they're these little dolls, and you just literally beat the crud out of them. And you can hit them on something. Kids love these Dang It dolls. I have adults get these Dang It dolls. And it's really good because you, in the moment, just get to get it out. Years ago, when I was like, most people go through a divorce, it's not comfortable. And when I went through my divorce in 2010, I got a throw bunny. And I would take the bunny and throw it across the room because I knew long term, if I didn't get the anger out, it's going to cause me a problem. It's going to get me sicker in my multiple sclerosis journey back then. And then I also had a punching bag. So I'm really big advocate, especially for men, if you have husbands out there or brothers or fathers who have repressed, unexpressed anger, men can only, in my experience, process this through physicality. That physically has to leave a man's body. Testosterone drives it it needs to leave their body. Women, we can sometimes scream it out, but across the board, men typically do better with physical and women do better with screaming, but whatever works for you. I love, love, love a punching bag. I love a pillow to hit, something to scream into, and then also something called a bugger off letter. And you write these bugger off letters to someone who's really upset you, who you feel enraged to, but don't send it. Don't send it. You're just going to write this to really get everything out you wanted to say. And I tell people, use the darkest language you could ever imagine. I'm talking go to the depths, darkest parts of you that you didn't even know exist, that you want no other soul to know. And I have done a bugger off letter, and mine was 16 pages long. And it was back like in 2007, I wrote one. And I kept it for a good couple months, kept writing it. And I immediately burned it and then put water over it. Because the love of God, if someone saw that letter, they would have thought I was like in danger to self or others or something. But I was just getting this really hidden, secretive rage out that because I'm always so calm and composed, I just kept stuffing it. And, therapists, we feel anger too. And I know the benefit of letting it out. And always being so calm and sometimes emotionally underregulated is often a sign of trauma. So anytime I'm going to recommend something, please know I've done it. I use it, I have used it, and I recommend it. So my favorite go-to now is practicing yoga and Kundalini and seeing a yoga practitioner who specializes in somatic experiencing. I can't tell you how much that shifts things that have been stored in your body. I'm not kidding, since you were born. And it just gets it out. And I have found myself doing this holding a pose, and all of a sudden I'm crying. I'm like, oh my love of God, why am I crying? Couldn't even tell you why. It just, something starts to release and I just go with it. I oftentimes see people in yoga crying. You just don't say anything to them. You kind of mind your own business. You stay in your own lane, because that's how powerful moving pain and trauma out of your fascia is. It just has this cathartic, most beautiful emotional release. So easy anger out hacks: pillow, Dang It doll. I love a punching bag, bugger off letters, and any form of like somatic experiencing where you can move the body and start doing stretches and moving it out. And next week, I'm going to have actually two of the guests, the woman with mast cell activation, and then another young adult. I think she's 20 now. who is a small fiber neuropathy and IBS. And we're going to get into what they experience, the anger that they experience and what happened, how sick they both really were both really, really sick. And how through this process of understanding the mind-body connection, they're both absolutely thriving right now. So it's been a long time coming, and I can finally say the book is ready to order on Amazon. Yay! It's Empower Your Child to Heal, 8 mind-body methods to help your child with anxiety, gut, and autoimmune issues, out on Amazon. You can get access to a free monthly newsletter, these healing antidotes and healing phases, and also info on the back-to-school tips are still there, as well as tips how to work through an anxiety and panic attack. So if you sign up, you'll get a monthly newsletter and you'll get these downloads, actually even a free chapter of the book. And you can find that at the website on drskyler.net. I look forward to connecting with you all next week, and have abundant blessings. Thank you for your time. I feel so grateful you have listened to the end. When we begin to understand how our body manifests stress, trauma, depression, anxiety, and even unexpressed emotions, we then create a space, a bandwidth in our minds to begin to heal our bodies. Healing is a decision, and I am grateful for yours. Abundant blessings, Dr. Schuyler.
To learn more about the work Dr. Schuyler is doing, please visit drschuyler.net. That's drskYler.net. And remember to subscribe to this podcast wherever you like to listen.
Produced by Audavita Studios. Connect your voice to the world.